Please welcome the panel on Beyond the Headlines, Addressing Antisemitism and Religious Bias Based on Facts, moderated by Executive Vice President, Milken Family Foundation, and partner at Maron and Sandler, Richard Sandler.
We got it all reversed? Okay, we were...
Now let's get back up and...
Far right, so I think we go to the far.
I think that's fair.
Hello there.
Good afternoon. Now that we finally got organized up here, let me welcome you to Addressing Antisemitism and Religious Bias Based upon Facts. We've all seen the explosion in this country of anti-Semitism since October 7th. And it has never manifested itself more than we've seen in the last week, right up till the news this morning, with what's going on our college campuses. I personally was an undergraduate at Berkeley in the late 1960s. We certainly had our share of protests. We had protests about the Vietnam War, about civil rights, about women's rights, about a lot of issues that were going on at that time. We even had the police called on campus. And one year, even the National Guard was called out. But what we didn't have cancel culture. We wanted to hear everybody's opinion. If someone had an opinion we didn't like, we wanted to go there and let them know what our opinion was and why we didn't like it. These protests were never about harassing or intimidating our fellow students on campus, or attacking one group, or going after another country that wasn't our own country, and attacking individuals that had nothing to do with the policies of that country. So this morning, we're going to discuss what's happening, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about what we can do and what we should do to combat anti-Semitism and religious intolerance, and to bring our country together. Let me introduce our incredible panel. Over on the far left, doesn't mean anything, because I don't want Van to get up and start moving around the chairs here. It's Rabbi David Wolpe.
Yay.
Rabbi Wolpe brought his own crew here today. Rabbi Wolpe is Rabbi Emeritus of the Sinai Temple here in Los Angeles, of which, full disclosure, I am a member. He served as the senior rabbi at that synagogue for 26 years. As fate would have it, he has spent the past year as a visiting scholar at Harvard University in their Divinity School. When Newsweek magazine ranked rabbis nationally many years ago, David was named the most influential rabbi in America. And in a few minutes, you'll see why. Sitting right next to me here is Van Jones, someone who probably needs no introduction, but everybody deserves an introduction. Thank you. In addition to being a highly respected CNN host, Van's an Emmy Award-winning producer, a best-selling author, a social entrepreneur, who has created another organization to reach out to the community and bring our community closer together. Sitting next to Van is Daniel Lubetzky. He's a builder of businesses and civic movements that empower people to work across divides, to constructively solve problems, which makes him also a social entrepreneur. Daniel's the son of Holocaust survivors. He's the founder of Kind Bar Snacks. I think many of us have enjoyed them over the years, and a board member of the Anti-Defamation League. And sitting next to Dan is Arielle Mokhtarzadeh. Arielle is a dear friend, a proud alumna of UCLA. When she was at UCLA, and not that long ago, she served as the undergraduate student body president. She was also a board member of Bruins for Israel. Today, she's also co-president of 30 Years After, a nonpartisan nonprofit committed to promoting participation in leadership of Iranian Jewish Americans. Arielle represented her community at the recent Israel March in Washington, at which Van also spoke, and in her young career has proven herself to be a bridge builder. So let me start with a question to each of you, and Rabbi Wolpe, I'm going to start with you. How did we get here, and how do you define here?
Wilshire Boulevard. No, here is a place where either it is the return of the repressed, that is, we've come out of remission, which we were in for 60 years or 70 years after the Holocaust, where anti-Semitism that was dormant has been given permission to surge again. That's a piece of it. But also, I think that there is, like a lot of social contagions, a certain viral component to the anti-Semitism that exists now, which means that some of it is real and some of it is blown up and not as real as we think. I mean, one of the things that I just want to tell you is I walk by the encampments all the time, and they're having the time of their lives. They're having the best time. And some of the students are there because this is what they're going to remember about college, was remember when we were in the encampments. So it's not like everyone there is anti-Semitic or anyone there even cares about the issue. It's true. I mean, some of them do. But the way we got here was a combination, I think, of money and influence from the Middle East. I just want to mention, I've said this several times, when I was on Sam Harris's podcast, he mentioned that our mutual friend, with whom I'm actually going to do an event in a couple of weeks, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, said when she grew up in Somalia, she didn't know a Jew, and she didn't know anyone who knew a Jew, but she knew Jews were evil. Now, if you come from that atmosphere, and there's any kind of controversy that involves Jews, you know what your contribution is going to be. So that's another part of it. And then the only other, and I'm sure we'll elaborate on this because I've taken enough time, is that there is a progressive, hard-left ideology which is not unfamiliar to Jews, because it's not only there are two components to it that are important to remember. One is, in any oppressor-oppressed ideology, Jews are not going to do well, because the world weirdly doesn't see us just because we were persecuted and killed as being oppressed. And also, any ideology that is vaguely Marxist, that flattens the world, that everybody should be the same except for economic classes or whatever, any group that has traditionally defined themselves by their distinction and difference is also going to be seen as some kind of deep irritant. And then the last part of it, I'm sorry to say, is that it is supercharged by 2,000 years of, even though, thank God, Christianity is not what it was, you don't get rid of toxic ideologies very easily, and they can resurface just like viruses in the body. And it has unfortunately happened, especially as it spread to the Middle East. So that's a really quick summary of a lot of stuff that's going on.
Okay. So, Arielle, it's never something that somebody wishes to have to go after Rabbi Wolpe, but you were at UCLA as a student, and you were on campus last week. What concerned you about the kids in the encampment? What did you find? And then the same question, where do you think we are?
Sure. Before I jump in, I want to acknowledge two things. The first is that today is the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah, so our minds and our hearts are with the 6 million who perished during the Holocaust, but all those who survive. I'm thinking of my dear friend Adela Mannheimer, who celebrated her 72nd, 73rd Liberation Day yesterday. She calls it her very own Cinco de Mayo, who's turning 102 in June. But I also want us to think of the over and at least 130 Israeli civilians who are still held captive in Gaza today. So how did we get here? I was a student at UCLA from 2014 to 2018. I was a very unique student. Part of the reason why I chose to go to UCLA was because I was convinced that I had the power, thanks to teachers and leaders like Rabbi Wolpe and Richard, to really transform the conversation on campus, and I really tried my best. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism existed far before October 7th, and unfortunately, I think it's going to continue to exist even after this war, which we all hope will end soon with the hostages coming home and with a ceasefire agreement that results in Hamas's unconditional surrender. I think it's going to continue to exist after that. So just to set the stage, anti-Semitism existed at UCLA for years. I've talked to alumni who went to UCLA 15, 20 years before me. They experienced it. I experienced it. My cousin, who's graduating this May, also experiences it as well. I was student body president from 2017 to 2018. One of the first things I did on campus was put and affix a mezuzah to my office door. For those of you who don't know what a mezuzah is, it's a beautiful ornament with a Jewish scroll with a blessing on the inside. It's meant to bless our comings and goings from our places where we work and live and stay. Within 6 months of my affixing that mezuzah to my door, it was viciously ripped down. The university was never able to prosecute or figure out who did it because we had no video cameras in the student union. But what I did exactly 1 week after we found out that the mezuzah came down was wrote an open letter to our entire campus community, the students, the administrators, the police department, anyone who wanted to come, to invite them to join me in rededicating that mezuzah. So we put one right back up. Unfortunately, Jewish students on campus today don't have that same opportunity because they're physically being barred. And I should say, it's not just Jewish students, it's Zionist students. It's anyone who's willing to ask questions about what's happening on campus today. Unfortunately, unless you adopt a certain terminology, a certain vocabulary, a certain set of ideas, you are essentially not allowed to have a conversation. As Richard mentioned, I went to campus last week because as someone who was deeply, deeply ingrained in the community, I wanted to see for myself and attempt to have a conversation with some of those students. Because, believe it or not, I still believe in a two-state solution. I think it's the only way forward to see Israelis and Palestinians live together in peace with dignity and justice. And unfortunately, there was not one student who would speak to me. I was told, we don't know, we can't speak to you, you're gonna have to speak to our media director. And I wasn't there as a member of the media, I didn't have a camera on me, I really wanted to understand, and there was not one person who was willing to have that conversation with me. Richard, I wanna take a second to answer your other question of how did we get here. For me, here starts in 1979. My family, my parents are both refugees from Iran. Unfortunately, the playbook that we're seeing play out not only on college campuses today, but in American society is a playbook that my family knows all too well. When they see college students marching through the streets, marching through campus, chanting death to America, death to Israel, or cheering on individuals in the Middle East who are chanting death to America, death to Israel, they hear those echoes because they heard them in Iran. In the 1970s, right? Students, understandably so, had issues with injustice in Iran, and they went to the streets and protested. And unfortunately, their discontent was weaponized by a regime, an authoritarian regime, who used their protests and their injustice, essentially used them as boots on the ground to bring in a regime that not only executes women, executes LGBTQ individuals, and executes anyone who's willing to ask questions. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing today is a recycling of the playbook, and I think we have to ask why, how, and where it's coming from.
So, thank you, Arielle. And I just want everyone here to know, I know that when the information went out about this session, that Barry Weiss was going to be one of our panelists. Unfortunately, I heard from Barry last night at 9 o'clock. She had the flu, she was running a fever, and she couldn't come. I called Arielle, and I think, as you can see, that as great as Barry is, we're not losing anything here today. Right. So thank you. Thank you. Daniel, you're the son of Holocaust survivors. You have been thinking about this. Your family's been thinking about this since probably before you were born. So from your perspective, where are we, and how do you look at it?
Thank you. I want to tell you that when I came into this, I tend to think that humor is a very important force in the hardest of times, and I was very, very worried about how I was going to handle, because there's so much passion and sadness and concern and worry in my heart and in my mind that I thought I was not going to be able to deal with this. But somehow the Milken chairs, these chairs are just so ridiculously cushiony, and they bend down, and I don't know if you understand, they really are relaxing us. I don't know, like there's something very soothing. So now I have to worry about regaining my passion. But yes, my father was a Holocaust survivor, and if I had to, when I grew up, I could not connect the dots of how the Holocaust happened. I studied and studied it and studied it, but I could not connect the dots of how something like that can happen. It's terrifying to me And that over the last many years, I now can connect the dots on how those things happen. I'm not saying we're living through that today, because we're not, and we need to remember that we're not. And later, I'll highlight the differences so that we can be surgical in our strategies. But it is the most serious time, not just against anti-Semitism, but against democracy, rule of law, freedom, liberty, meritocracy, respect, kindness, all the basic values that make me love the United States so much. And we need to understand where these things coming from so we can be smart in how to respond to it. So like Arielle said, some of our enemies that are funding this work have been doing this for decades, and it's very methodical and very intentional. It's very intentional that the Islamic Republic regime repressing the people in Iran is funding not just Hamas, but a lot of these groups directly or indirectly, that Hamas is very deeply involved in funding stuff. A terrorist organization that has been banned is finding a way to send resources to our college campuses. We need to fight that. And the organizations that are the organizations at the core of these, within our lifetimes, the BDS movement, it is their intention to try to drive a wedge between Jews and other parts of society. It is their intention. They're dividers because they're destroyers, because they cannot build. They cannot beat the United States or the Jewish people or civilization through building. They're not builders, they're destroyers. And destroyers, what do? They divide, they demolish, and they diminish. And that's what they're trying to do to us. So it's been happening for many, many years. You saw Jewish women trying to join a march many years ago and being prevented from joining a march because they didn't sign on to the way the BDS movement saw things. I co-founded with my friend Mohammad Darawshe, a movement called One Voice to try to amplify the voice of moderates, seize back the agenda away from forces of violent absolutism on the Israeli and the Palestinian side. We have a grassroots movement with close to over 1 million signatories and members on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side, with active people in Gaza today, in Ramallah, all across the West Bank, all across Israel. And BDS targeted us. BDS didn't just target the Jewish people at BDS, at One Voice, they targeted our Palestinians even more. They tried to dehumanize them and to isolate and ostracize them. It is very intentional that they do what Arielle described. They're trying to denigrate Jewish students and say, you cannot walk through here. You cannot access the library. I read some articles that talk about how this protest movement is non-violent. Now, of course, there's been acts of physical violence that are horrible, but the violence that is perpetrated through these actions, through these passive-aggressive methodologies, it's no less pernicious and dangerous. Because imagine if you're in a college campus and you are a student and you want to walk through your classroom and they tell you, no, you cannot walk through here. You cannot access this road. You need to go all the way around. You cannot go to this quad. You cannot. Why? Because you're Jewish, because you don't sign on to our ethos. You have to wear a wristband that we will assign, and if not, you're excluded. This is disrespectful. This is dehumanizing. And if you were doing it to gay students, to black students, to Hispanic students, you would stop that immediately. And so we need to understand that this is very, very deliberate. And these groups have been working on this for decades. Their playbook is, how can we get as close enough to the law to try to prevent outright violence, but to try to incur mental violence to prevent the students, to try to trigger them, to try to dehumanize them, to try to isolate them. And so the administrators that are tolerating this, any time that you allow bullies to continue bullying, whoever they bully, whether it's a Palestinian or a Muslim kid or a Jewish or an Israeli kid, whether it's a black or a white kid or any denomination or group, anytime you tolerate bullying, it only gets worse. And so that's why we're facing what we have, because the administrators didn't have the courage and the guts to enforce the law. What else does it mean in terms of enforcing the law? All these masked protesters, there were Ku Klux Klan laws that prevented the masks. We understand that the anonymity of the mask can allow people to perpetrate crimes. Over the last 3 years, unfortunately, many of these laws were removed from the books, and others are just not being enforced. You have to enforce these things. You have to ensure accountability so that when people are denigrating others, they're going to be held accountable. And we need to go on the offense. We cannot just play defense. If you're playing soccer and they're trying to score at you and all you're doing is trying to, my son is here with me and he's like, Dad, please don't use a sport analogy. You're going to really mess it up. But you cannot ever win a game if you're just playing defense. We need to go out on the offense. The enemy is the poster boy of hatred. They're violent absolutists, not just against the Jewish people, but against Palestinians that want to resolve this conflict. They're causing harm not just to Jews and to the entire world, but even to those that they pretend to defend and represent, because all the Palestinians that have created this movement over the last 30 years, they're terrified by these absolutist claims because they know that what it's going to mean is eternal war for all of their peoples of the region. They understand the courageous people that are living in the ground in Gaza, in the West Bank, that I talk to every day. I have tens of thousands of Palestinians that I've met, Muslims that are upset about this, but their voices are not rising up. But what we need to do is we need to expose the extremist hate and vile and the lack of ability to resolve problems from these extremist movements. I could keep going, but I think I'm going to be quiet.
Thank you, Dan. I'm glad you got your passion back after you're sitting on a comfortable seat.
Even with this chair.
Okay. So, okay, Dan, from your perspective, what concerns you about this, and why are you speaking out on this? I mean, you spoke at the Washington March eloquently about your feelings about hate in general and about families and children and what we should expect from one another. I know you're working very hard in Atlanta to bring business people from the Jewish community and the African American community together. So how do you envision what we are talking about here?
First of all, I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry. We should not be having this conversation at all. The Jewish community has blessed the world over and over and over again. You invented social justice. Moses was the first social justice activist. You invented social justice. Chased out every country for 2,000 years, held on to the ritual and told your children, remember this and bless others. Repair the world, repair the world. And for that not to be foremost in the minds of this new generation is our fault. So I just want to say from the very beginning, where we are is a place we shouldn't be. Globally, nationally, locally. This is a big deal globally. And you and I have been together for a long time, and I love you, brother. If this is World War III, if this is the beginning of World War III, which some people think it is, it gives you a helpful frame. World War II was 80% kinetic military, 20% propaganda. World War III is the reverse. The kinetic action is actually relatively small, but the propaganda action is big. So who are the contestants here? You have, and we're all friends here, you have a set of very flawed democracies. Beautiful, but very flawed democracy. United States, flawed democracy. Canada, flawed democracy. The EU, flawed democracies. Australia, New Zealand, India, flawed democracies. Japan, flawed democracies. A set of flawed democracies against 4 perfect totalitarian regimes. China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Cooperating more and more and more against us. And we have a big problem now on the Democratic side in the Democratic camp. Notice when Russia moves against EU through Ukraine, through propaganda, a section of conservatives side with Putin. Then, when they move against Israel, Iran attacking Israel via Hamas, a section of the left sides with Hamas through propaganda. This is unwelcome. And so the stakes are much higher than just our precious Jewish community and just our precious Jewish state. The stakes are for all of Western civilization here. And so that should get everyone's attention. This is a sinister, diabolical plot to take all of us down, starting as always with the Jews, but never ending there. Nationally, the big tragedy, the big horror is the palpable and obvious collapse of the Black-Jewish alliance. The collapse of the most important alliance in 10,000 years of human history. You've never had two outsider ethnic groups come together under worse circumstances and do more good for more people than our peoples. Starting in 1909, the NAACP is founded by Black and Jewish people. In fact, the NAACP starts off as an adjunct of a Jewish organization. Nobody knows that. People forget. Jewish people were not considered white. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that's us, okay, in this room. 1910, the group becomes the Urban League, also Black and Jewish. You walk through the last century, when Hitler starts his savagery, and white Americans don't want Jews here, it's Black colleges that say, send us your scholars. It's Black colleges that save professors, academics, onto Black campuses. Nobody knows this. You march through the rest of the century. It's Black and Jewish kids who go to the South, including my godmother, Dorothy Zellner, who's a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It's Jewish kids that are killed. This is white kids, those Jewish kids that are killed for civil rights. It's Jewish lawyers that go south and stand next to Black lawyers and sue in all those dangerous courthouses and drive back to hotels and motels, risking their lives for civil rights. And it doesn't, don't talk about, you can stop, it's all, oh, Dr. King, no. That continues on. Every cause, every candidate, everything in the country to push things forward, you look behind it, it's Black and Jewish people together. You have two peoples co-authoring what we now call American democracy. Two people co-authoring what we now call blessing the entire world. For that to collapse in a century that needs more democracy, not less, is dangerous for everybody. And by the way, again, we're all friends here. The reality is the vast majority of Jewish people, they weren't on the front lines of civil rights. It's true. You know what else is true? The vast majority of Black people weren't either. Because you get killed. It's only a small number of people in either community who took those risks. But over and over and over again, Rabbi, it was the cultural DNA of the Jewish community, repair the world, tikkun olam, and the cultural DNA of the Black community, justice for all, that over and over, the best in our communities, the best, not everybody. We have buttheads in our community that don't like Jewish people. You got buttheads in your community that don't like Black people. We all got terrible cousins and uncles. But the best people in our communities always came together, and that's what's now at stake. That's what's now at stake. So let me just say one last thing. These students, I went over there, UCLA, because I saw the young man that was stopped, and he wasn't allowed. We weren't allowed. You don't stop somebody. You don't tell them they're not allowed. We weren't allowed. So I went over there. It was better than what I feared, but it wasn't as good as what I hoped. It turns out they were stopping everybody. They stopped me. They wouldn't let me in. I had to go get a faculty person and a bunch of other people. So they were stopping anybody who didn't subscribe to their agenda, including the Jewish students. And the Jewish students, obviously, it felt much worse, but I will say they were terrible to everyone. So they were equal opportunity, mean people. So that's better. That's better than I had feared. But it's not as good as what I hoped. On the one hand, you do have those good kids Rabbi talked about, and this guy's got the biggest heart in the world. He's going to look for good. And there were a bunch of kids out there that were camping. And it's kind of cool to camp. So, and they just don't like wars, and they see these images, and I don't say the majority of young people were like that. But there is a small core of these kids that are terrible. They are hateful. They are against Jewish people. They are against Israel. They are against America. They are against capitalism. They are terrible. And I don't care what anybody tells you, they're not marginal. They're in the center of this thing. They are leading this thing. And they're infecting the other kids. And so we have a problem of this thing now becoming jihad chic, intifada chic, where it becomes cool to be a part of a hate group. And that's new and dangerous, and I will do everything in my power to turn it back.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about, and Van, thank you, because you hit on all those points, is what can we do now? First and foremost, what can we do to make the rest of society understand that this is an attack on all of us? You know, what can we do? David, you've been on Harvard for the last year. It certainly has gotten tremendous amount of spotlight on it and what's going on. You've talked to students. You talked to everyone in the community. You know, what would you think we can do to, number one, change what's going on campuses, but get the message out that this is an attack on America, not just an attack on the Jewish people?
Right. That is an incredibly important point. And if you have any doubt about this, you know, Down to America is almost as popular a chant as Down with Israel. Mm-hmm. The promotion of the Houthis, who have on their flag, Death to America, Death to Israel, on the flag, that's their patriotic symbol. And God is great. I have to do justice. And I don't know how many of you saw the picture of George Washington draped in a keffiyeh and Palestinian flags with genocide on the base that they had written. This is, and I think that putting it in global terms is really important to talk about it as, you know, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and also their many allies, which is part of what I think we need to do is to frame this as bigger than the Jews, because it is bigger than the Jews, and also because as much as it is just to speak about the Jews as, you know, the first responders, so to speak, except whatever the opposite of the responders, the first victims. Maurice Samuel said, no one loves their alarm clock, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we keep saying we're the first ones, people get tired of hearing that we're the first ones, even though it's true, and we are the alarm clock. We have to let people know that this is actually much bigger than an attack on Jews or even than an attack on Israel, and that the delegitimation of Israel as a state is part of a larger strategy, and everything that they attack about Israel is transferable to all these other states, even though nobody says that they shouldn't exist. And the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism thing, they're not. Am I anticipating your question before you get to it?
No, go right ahead.
All right, so they're not the same. They aren't the same. But the Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. And I mean, is it conceivable to be an anti-Zionist? And it's absolutely conceivable. And I'm sure there are a couple. But it really is important to make the case to people, not just that there are endless injustices in the world about which these students are completely indifferent, including the existence, by the way, today in the world of more slaves than have ever existed in absolute numbers ever in history, about which you hear nothing. And all the other, people say Assad killed 600,000 and they don't care, and on and on and on. But the other issue is actually even more significant, which is the strategy of this state should not exist. Germany started 2 world wars. No one said there shouldn't be a Germany. I visited Rwanda, where half the population killed the other half of the population. Nobody said there shouldn't be a Rwanda. There has never, it doesn't matter what any state does. I was just with a bunch of African students, in fact, and that I said to them, have any of you ever heard of any state in Africa that shouldn't exist? And they said, no. And I said, what is the only state you've ever heard of that shouldn't exist? And every single one of them said Israel. It's the only one. So this clearly is about something larger than what we're seeing, and all why questions are overdetermined. There are always many, many, many reasons why, and anti-Semitism is one reason why, and ideologies of hatred are another reason why. But the other reason that this is so, which is so anathema to American ears that they almost don't, is ideals that we think of as the brass ring, like golden, unobjectionable, like freedom, like prosperity, like success, sound to other ears like oppression, like colonialization, like cruelty. And until we understand that we are seeing an inversion of everything that we hold sacred, we won't really understand this. And I just want to close with a beautiful distinction made by someone that many of you know, Dara Horn. She makes a distinction between Purim anti-Semitism and Hanukkah anti-Semitism. Purim anti-Semitism, which is both Jewish holidays. Purim anti-Semitism is we want to kill all the Jews. That's what Haman does. He wants to kill all the Jews. Hanukkah isn't like that. Hanukkah anti-Semitism is if you will just be different, we'll accept you. You just have to not be who you are, and then you'll be okay. And that's why you see some Jews at these demonstrations, because they are under the tragic misimpression that if only they will be what the surrounding society wants them to be, then they will be accepted too. And they will be for a brief time. But historically, we know that Purim always follows Hanukkah.
So, Arielle, you're obviously the person on this panel that has been in college the most recently. You are part of Gen, I guess, are you Gen Z, Gen
I'm
Y?
millennial.
She's Gen Young.
She's Gen Young.
Gen Young.
So basically. So one of the problems that I hear us talking about, we can talk about it here, all right? But we live in a society that has been developing for 20 years. This is not happening since October 7th, where we've divided ourselves to a point that if you agree with me, politically, philosophically, I embrace you. If you disagree with me, I want to kill you, or I want to silence you or cancel you or whatever else. We have social media. Didn't exist when I was in college, all right? Everybody's got a cell phone. That didn't happen, people don't realize 20 years ago that wasn't the case. So how do we get the generations to start talking to each other, to start listening to each other, to understand what we have in common, and to understand that the attacks that we are talking about here on this stage today are attacks on everybody, not just people that are for a two-state solution or a one-state solution or whatever. So.
Sure. Before I answer your question, I want to share a few facts. I learned these stats over the weekend, and they really blew my mind. There are 6,000 college campuses in this country. Of those 6,000, there are encampments on 30 campuses. 30 campuses. There are protests on an additional 30 campuses, meaning that of the 6,000 campuses in this country, there are only 60 campuses where students have taken to their campuses to talk about this issue. I find it hard to believe that the students at the other 5,940 campuses don't care about what's happening in the Middle East, which is why, as much as I want to believe in students' grassroots justice and their desire to stand up for what's right and wrong in the world, it's hard for me to believe that this movement is actually grassroots. So I want to say that. On the flip side of that, I want to say throughout my 4 years on campus, I worked tirelessly to build relationships between Jewish students and non-Jewish students. Van, prior to you speaking, I was going to get up here and say that when a student on our campus put blackface on, it was the Jewish students who showed up to march with them around campus. When there were threats of ICE coming to our campus and undocumented students were afraid, it was the Jewish students who linked arms with them to make sure they wouldn't be able to come on campus. When trans students didn't like that their IDs didn't have their real lived experience identity on those cards, it was a Jewish student body president who made it possible for them to put their lived experiences on those cards that they used every day. And to be honest with you, on October 8th, when I saw my friends, who I showed up for time and time again, go to social media, not to condemn one of the worst terror attacks in the history of the Jewish people, but to suddenly talk about rights and not rights of Palestinians or Israeli Arabs in Israel, I thought to myself, what the heck? I showed up for you. You can't show up for me. And to be honest with you, Van, up until this moment, I was done. I told myself I was done showing up for the other communities. But you being here has completely transformed my mind. No, and the truth is, part of the intention here is to make it uncomfortable for us. They want, and to Van's point, they want to make it difficult for those brave people who are willing to step up and make that first move and show up even when it's uncomfortable to disrupt this cycle of discomfort and disengagement, right? They'll say or do something to make it impossible for us to show up. We'll get uncomfortable and we'll take a step back. And their hope is we'll continue to take the step back until we stop showing up. But the reality is we can't afford to, right? And it's also not in our Jewish DNA. One of my favorite Jewish proverbs is written by a rabbi named Rabbi Hillel. He says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And that's really resonated with me forever. It is essential, and it's become clear to us, that if Jews don't show up for Jews, nobody else will. It's also abundantly clear that our history teaches us that if we don't show up for other people, then we aren't us. And the beauty of Judaism is that you can hold that duality together. It is entirely possible to be a Jew who stands deeply and strongly with the Jewish people and the Jewish state and Jewish ideals. And that also necessitates that when things are going wrong in the world for the rest of the people, we have to show up as well. So I hope we as a community, despite this moment where we feel we have so staunchly to stand up for ourselves, even at the expense of cutting off relationships and ties with other communities, that we'll continue to show up even when it's uncomfortable. Because if we stop showing up, that's when we really lose the game.
Thank you. So, Van, you introduced that topic so important today about showing up for each other. And there's been a lot of talk within Jewish community that the relationship between the black community and the Jewish community somehow has gone awry.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to get your opinion as to whether or not it's as bad as it's projected to be. Mm-hmm. And number two, how do we work together? I know you're working on this. How do we work together? Because we should be working together on this. We need allies, you need allies, and we need to defeat their enemy, the common enemy out there.
You were asking Van?
Yes. Yeah.
Because we're both working on it. So.
Well, he'll get his chance.
Well, look, black people need more friends and fewer enemies. Jewish people need more friends and fewer enemies. And black Jews need their relatives to act better. So it'd be nuts for us to become enemies of each other, given those three facts. I think we're seeing the clash of two historic epigenetic traumas. More than anything else. First of all, I think for the Jewish community, this is starting to feel like Holocaust 2.0. That you're starting to see the signals and the signs that if they keep going the direction they're going, results in massive murder. And so the Jewish community is saying, hey, this is not good. Something needs to happen, and it's not. I mean, you can see. I mean, it's epigenetic. It's not people. It's not voluntary. People are traumatized and re-traumatized. And they want voices. They want people to speak. The silence is making it worse. I think for black folks, what we're seeing, what's being triggered for us is a whole other set of epigenetic traumas that have to do with colonization and have to do with how many African people were killed during our decolonization struggles. 6 million were killed by the Belgians. The French, the good guys, killed 1 million Algerians. So these images that we're seeing stir up in us some real trauma. Like, is this what it looks like? And then that would make it hard enough. Oh, and the other thing is, I think for the Jewish community, their main concern is silence. I think for black people, our main deep fear is raising our hand, being singled out and lynched. So cancel culture has a special terror for us, that I'm gonna get lynched. If I say the wrong thing, if I raise my hand, I'm gonna get lynched. And so for the first time, what the Jewish community needs from us and what we have to offer, they don't match. The other thing is, what I'm seeing is that the black community is not used to people needing anything from us in the first place. The Jewish community got a 50-year holiday from history where they got a chance to finally have enough strength that they could have a state, that they could help others, and they went nuts helping people. The most helpful, you can't go to any poor community in America and not find Jewish kids who went to great schools coming to our community and helping. It's a part of the culture, and as soon as it was unleashed, for the past 50 years, it's been unleashed to great good. The black community, we have so many problems that we don't have a committee to help anybody else. It's like we have, that committee doesn't exist. And so for the first time, like when I'm talking to the business people in Atlanta, they're like, oh, of course they need us? Somebody needs us? Really? Okay. Well, I mean, and then, and then they have this moment of embarrassment. It's like they forgot their best friend's birthday, like, oh, were we supposed to do something? So there's a thing. And there's another thing. Now we're friends here, so this is, the other thing that's happening in the black community is, a lot of black people don't know that all their white friends are Jewish. They don't know. So this has been, it's like, your friend Jared, your friend Rachel, they're all Jewish. And black people really don't know that. So somebody's last name is Gold, we think silver. Like it's not. And so
I was Jewish too.
Exactly. No one's Jewish too. Right. So I have to tell my black friends, guys, seriously, if all Jewish people were purple, you'd have no white friends, okay? None. You think there's a bunch of cool white people who care? They're just all Jewish people. There's no other, we don't have any other friends. There's no black Swedish alliance. There's no black Japanese alliance. There's no black Inuit alliance. This is the only alliance that we have. And so there's a whole learning process that has to happen of people realizing that we're needed, that we matter, that our voices matter, that us holding our sisters and brothers who've been holding us this whole time. So I just want you to think, now listen, is it true that there is some resentment in the black community toward the Jewish community? Yes. Jealousy? Yep. Yes. Even anti-Jewish bigotry? Yes. That's not any different. Yeah. In the Jewish community, is there anti-black bigotry? Sure, of course. That's not different. What's different is that the good people, the best people, are misunderstanding each other. There is a way forward, and I'd love to hear you on this. But just so you think, just so you understand, there's a little bit of hope here. We haven't even tried to fix this. not among the Generation X and Boomers. These kids are out here doing whatever they're doing. Right. But the Generation X and Boomers, there's 5 H's, and we can get to probably a deal on 4 of the 5. I don't care about dialogue, I care about deals. I don't want pity, I want partnership. Partnership is a two-way street. What's the deal? There's 5 H's. Number 1, there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. African Americans are not going to be supportive of the IDF in that conflict. Don't take it personally. Black people don't support wars like that. We didn't support Vietnam. Dr. King, Muhammad Ali, we didn't support. As many black people as got killed in 9/11, we were 90%, 80% against Iraq. Black people just don't support wars like that. Don't ask a nun to twerk.
Okay.
Don't ask a Muslim to eat a ham sandwich, and don't ask black people to support wars like that. We're just not going to do it. So, but there's 4 other H's. There's the need for the Jewish people to have a secure homeland. We can support you on that. Dr. King supported you on that. There's a need for the hostages to come home. We should be a lot louder on that. We came here as hostages. We understand. We understand. There's the hate crimes that are happening against Jewish people. We could and should be louder on that, and can be. And lastly, there's Hamas, which is a stench in the nostrils of God, and which should not steal the title of freedom fighter from real freedom fighters like Nelson Mandela, who never raped anybody, never kidnapped anybody, never butchered anybody, never did. Yes, he had armed struggle. It was against soldiers and infrastructure, and it was. At the end, he wanted everyone together. Hamas is the opposite of freedom fighters. They're freedom takers. And we should, as black people, we should be denouncing them much more than we are. So on the 5 H's, there's 4. There's 4 we can come together on. And we need now to reforge this alliance. We need to reforge it. The civil rights generation is gone. Now it's on us. And there are deals to be cut. There's, we should... Tel Aviv should be a sister city to Atlanta. Those African-American kids from Atlanta should get a chance to go to Tel Aviv and see what happens when you stick together and get your country back and preserve your culture and respect each other. You can stand up to the whole world and make the whole world respect you. We need that inspiration. There should be an alliance between HBCUs and Hillels. That should be an alliance that we fight for. Every black college is connected to a Hillel. And lastly, every Jewish holiday, the last day of the Jewish holiday, the last day of Passover, the last day of Hanukkah should be a black and Jewish coming together. We did that for Hanukkah this year in Los Angeles. We did that for Passover, and it was beautiful. And so it's the next 100 years of the Black-Jewish Alliance that I'm fighting for. The next 100 years, and we need each other. So thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, this could go on. I'd love this to go on for another hour. It's a fantastic conversation, but we're down to the last few minutes.
Oh.
You have set the stage for what I really want to end on, which is hope, things that we can do. So, Dan, what gives you hope?
This is the hope dealer.
Okay.
First of all, these panelists give me hope. I'm like, thank you so much. You're such an inspiration. And Van and I were talking in the hallways about stuff we're going to do together to really give, to honor that vision. I really am very inspired by you and by the future and by all your examples. I think the way I see this issue, and borrowing from what Arielle was talking about, this is not Israelis versus Palestinians or Jews versus Muslims or blacks versus whites or left versus right. This is extremism versus problem solvers. This is destroyers versus builders. And destroyers, as I said earlier, they cannot defeat us because they don't know how to build. They can only destroy, divide, diminish, and that's their playbook. And we need to not allow them to divide us with outside partners or within ourselves. We cannot deny the humanity of the other side because that's what they want. They want an absolutist vision. So anytime you jump on social media, the 2 core areas where we have a problem, and it's a very serious problem, but the cancer has not yet metastasized. It's a very, very serious problem. If it metastasizes, it will be the World War III. But right now it's contained. It's contained to social media, and it's contained to the college campuses and some high schools and middle schools with a rigid ideology that needs to be replaced by an ideology of builders, where this us versus them mentality needs to be replaced by a builder's toolkit to actually solve problems. But even in the college campuses that are horrible, like Arielle said, out of 6,000, only 60 had these very, very serious manifestations and activism. And even within those, like I gave the talk at the Hillel conference, and I was sitting next to the president of Arizona State University and asked her, you know, this, what I looked at on social media looks really bad. Is it as bad? I said, look, it is bad. There's 8 students that are virulently anti-Semitic, and they bring together like 200 or 300 people, both from the student group and from the community. But there's 80,000 students. And between the administration, the staff, there's over 300,000 people in the community. And I'm sure it's gotten worse than the 200, 300 people, because that was a month or two ago. But it's really, really important to remember that at Colombia, which was one of the epicenters of a lot of this antagonism and hate, they elected not just a Jewish student, an Israeli Zionist. Zionism, for anybody that doesn't understand, is just the belief that Jews have the right to one homeland across the world. They're trying to make that to be a horrible curse word. All it means is that the Jewish people, because my father went through the Holocaust and he had nowhere else to escape, have the right to one place where they can determine their fates. It's not a bad word, but they're trying to make it one. And our responsibility is to remember that as builders, it's not just that we're going to win because we're Jewish builders. We're black builders, there's Muslim builders, there's Palestinian builders. I assure you that they're there. I know them, I've worked with them for 30 years. Builders are the aspirational tribe that we all need to replace. All these us versus them mentalities need to give way to all of us builders working together to build a better future together, to build, unite, and bring light to the world. And we're absolutely going to win because builders build bridges, build jobs, build opportunities, build a future, come up with medicines, come up with solutions. Builders will ultimately prevail, but we cannot take it for granted. We need to work really closely on those alliances to get there.
Thank you. Thank you. Arielle, let's hear what gives you hope.
Oof. I've worked at the Milken Institute for 5.5 years. I can tell you to date, we've never had a conversation about anti-Semitism. I'm sad that we have to have it, but I'm hopeful that there are this many people at a conference like this, of 5,000 people with over 100 sessions who choose to show up. My hope will cease if you don't all then go out into the conference, meet 3 people and talk about this session. Talk about what you learned, talk about the people you heard from, figure out what resonated with you most, share it on your social media. Unfortunately, we're all in this cycle of negativity, and we all have a story to share. Please share your part of the story.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So I was at a conference in Florida with 4,000 Jewish teenagers. And I was on a panel with 4 other people, and they said, what gives you hope? And I was going to say 4,000 Jewish teenagers, but unfortunately I was the 4th one to answer the question.
As you are today.
As I am today. So, and I want to say, before I tell you what I did say, I just want to say I feel honored. This was a remarkable panel. Really remarkable panel. And she grew up at my synagogue. So I'm so proud. I'm like bursting. So, and so finally, when they came to me, I had this sort of revelation. And I said, I'll tell you what gives me pride. I'm imagining a conversation with my great-great-great-grandfather. And I say to him, you know, there's a lot of anti-Semitism at Harvard. And he says to me, there are Jews at Harvard? And I say to him, yeah, but a lot of people there hate Israel. And he says to me, there's an Israel? And I realize we are so incredibly fortunate and incredibly blessed to live at a time when such a discussion is possible. And our responsibility is to make sure that our great-great-grandchildren will be blessed like that too.
Amen.
So, as we leave here, as the moderator, I get the last word. I just thought about this 2 minutes ago, but I want to close with a story that one of my teachers, somebody was also one of David's teachers, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, used to love to tell the story of when God was creating the world and he announced that he wanted to put the essence of God someplace on the planet. The angels rebelled. They said, you're creating a world, but this man that you are, this woman that you are creating is flawed. And they don't deserve it. They will abuse it. They will not respect it. Said, no, you decide where to put it, but we're putting it on the planet. So one of the angels said, let's put it at the highest top, at the highest mountain on the plate. The man will never get there. Another angel said, eventually they'll get there. They're creative enough, they're intelligent enough, they're devious enough, they'll get there. Says, well, let's put it where they can't get it. Let's put it the deepest part of the ocean, because they can't breathe underwater. And he goes, for the same reasons, they'll figure it out. They're going to get it there. Well, where can we hide it so man won't find it? And one of the angels says, I got an idea. Let's hide it inside a man. He'll never look for it there. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've heard today is that the enemy out there wants us not to find that. They want us to destroy ourselves from within because they can't destroy us from without. Let's remember that every one of us was created in the Lord's image. We all have a responsibility. You've heard from these incredible panelists that we have here today that we actually do have hope. We have the means to be victorious, but we can't sit back and be silent. We have to be part of that army that goes out and defeats the enemy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending our lunch program. Be sure to utilize the mobile app to stay up to date on the latest changes.